Now that you've had your practice using the colors and learning to shade and using them dry and wet and the different experiences from that, we're ready to start coloring in our girl. The tools that you'll need for coloring your swimsuit model is going to be your pink, light sand, craft brown, your clear blender, and then if you already have a pink or a blue, I use the frost blue for doing her eyes. You'll also want to have your detail eraser, a regular eraser, and then a few clean pieces of paper to put behind your work. The handouts that you'll need is going to be your walking pose mannequin, your reference for your fabric and shadowing, as well as her hair from the backside point of view. And then you might want to reference back to your color chart as well. All right, so let's get started and see how we did this. When I'm getting ready to start rendering my model in full color, the first thing I want to do is her face and hair. If for some reason I don't like it, I'll go ahead and just practice rendering what I'm going to do for her swimsuit, and then I'll get a new piece of paper and start over again. Now, taking an even closer look here, you're going to notice that there's little bits of pencil on the back side of the paper. If you recall, we had traced our girl on top of this pencil drawing. So when we did that, when we had these two pieces stacked and you're drawing one line on top of the other, some of the pencil from here transferred onto here. So before we start to color her, I don't want to be smearing any pencil around, and I for sure don't want to get any pencil here on the tip of my marker. So be sure to clean up your eraser really well and just lightly erase any pencil that you see on this drawing, and then come back and let's clean this with a cloth. Again, so I erased everything here from the marker side. So this is the correct side up. This is the back side of the paper. Just lightly erasing it, lightly cleaning stuff off. And I'm being really careful to not touch anywhere on my drawing with my fingertips, because I don't want to leave any kind of an oily fingerprint. Before I start to color, one thing I want to do is I want to move all of my tools and stuff out of the way, because I know that as I'm coloring, I might need to swivel this paper. Also, I'm going to be using these three markers together at the same time. So I'll go ahead and take the lids off and get the lids here out of the way as well, so that I'm not accidentally hitting them and they're rolling around and stuff. For the light blue for her eyes, I'll leave the lid on until I'm ready to just go ahead and put a couple drops on there. And then of course I have my piece of corduroy, so I can always take off if there's any ink on my pens. I know I'm going to not get one giant blob right when I touch it to the paper. So get your space set up and then watch me do the face all the way through, and then we'll pause and you can do it yourself. Now what we need to do is the same thing we did over here for our spheres. We need to know the light direction. So for me, I like to choose the light here off of her right side. So on the left side of the paper, go ahead and draw an arrow pointing down towards her. And this is going to be our light source. So we'll know that it's light on this side and dark on this side. Now let's also take a look here at our mannequin. So same thing, we have our light sources from here. It's really bright on this side, and you can see all the different shadowing here on her body. Most importantly, we're going to do the shadowing here for her face. Now taking a closer look here, you remember how I would always say, you never draw the nose in. In the end, you just draw a little bit of the tip, the nostrils, and you're good to go. But you can shade the nose. So here's where you're going to start to see the actual shaping of the nose, is when we shade this using our flesh tone markers. So for instance, we're going to use light sand for this girl. Now what we're going to end up doing is we need to do one complete wash on her face. So it's covered with the light sand color. And while it is still wet, we're going to come in and start hitting these shadow areas just like you see on the mannequin. We don't want to have a harsh brush stroke like we did here. So if you remember, we did a wash, we let it dry. We did a shadow, let it dry in a second one. We're going to do like this sphere down here where we got it wet and started adding our shadows, let it semi-dry, add some more shadows to it to get rid of the brush strokes. Another important thing to remember is at some point, we're going to flip this paper over. So the first thing that we should do to get this in your head is go ahead and take your light sand and let's highlight this arrow from the marker side. Once I start coloring her face, I cannot stop. I want to keep it wet as I add in different colors and stacking more layers to get shadows. The 3 markers you're going to need to start is going to be the light sand, the colorless blender, as well as your pink. And we're going to use all 3 of these together wet here on her face and up in the hairline. So what we're going to do is I'll turn this paper over. And it's hard to see at first, but once I start laying down my marker, you'll be able to follow exactly what I'm doing. The first thing I want to do is I want to get her hairline wet, so some of this face skin tone will bleed up into her hairline. And then immediately I'm going to switch to light sand and we're going to start coloring, and then we'll hit it with our pink. If this is your first time ever coloring a face, what I want you to do is just watch me all the way through at actual speed, and then you'll be able to come back to this moment and do it again with me at actual speed. I'm just making sure I don't have any color on my clear blender. So let's come up here and let's hit this right on her hairline. And then I'm just going to touch in the hairline and I'll start coloring her face. And I'm going right over everything. Her eyes, eyebrows, nose, lips, all of it. Now I want to come in and I'm going to hit some pink on her cheeks immediately, and it's going to just slowly disappear as well as blend in with no bleed marks. Now while it's still wet, I'm going to start working on her shadows on her face. So it's going to go shadow under her hair, under her eyebrow, above her eye, below her eye. Get the shape for her nose. Highlight her cheekbones, come down to her chin, into her lips, below the bottom lip, above the upper lip, underneath her nose. And then on this eye here, it's in the spotlight, but there's still a shadow under her eyebrow and above her eye. And if you want, you could do just a little hint of a cheekbone. And then a little shadow here underneath her hair. So far I've stacked it twice. I'm going to do my shadow one more time. I just want to hit pink again on her lips while it's still semi-wet. And now when I come in for my third shadow, it's going to be really strong because this face is almost dry. So I just want to be careful I'm not doing anything too crazy or harsh. And I can emphasize that cheekbone, the shadow underneath her lower lip, the shadow from her nose, and just a little bit of the shadow here under her hair and under her eyebrow. Now so far I haven't touched her ears, but I'll go ahead and get them now with just one coat. And then while it's semi-wet, I'm going to go ahead and come down here and start to get her neck all the way through where her swimsuit is, the straps on her swimsuit. So I'm getting a nice even wash here on her neck. For me, I like to throw a little pink here in this divot for her throat, and then on the outside edge. Now for the shadowing on her neck. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to get underneath her chin to emphasize her jawline, shadowing down on her neck. Again, in that little throat divot. And I'm gonna let her neck dry just a little bit more, but you can see the shadow is going almost to the other side here to really emphasize the separation between her neck and her chin. So again, I'm letting this dry. So far I've got 2 stacks of light sand. Now that it's semi-dry, I'll come in here for my 3rd time. Again, I'm underneath her jawline, almost to the other side of the neck, down one side of the neck, inside that little divot. And I think that's good enough. Now, if you recall, here we had the spear where it's scooping down, but you had to miss an area. Exactly like that is what's happening right here on the straps going around her neck. So you need to kind of already know what you're going to do here above her bust and then above her collarbone out on the shoulders. So then when I stop the coloring here for the pink, I know what I'm going to do as I continue on. I almost forgot I need to come in and throw 2 little dots of blue on her eye. While it's already dried somewhat, but it's still kind of wet. I don't want this color to be too sharp and stainy. And then I can come back, and now once it's completely dry, I'll hit this blue one more time to get a nice crisp edge for her iris. All right, so now you can go ahead and do yours. Now, while her face is drying, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and move on to one of her arms. Now, for doing her arms, we no longer need the clear blender, or we don't need this blue from what we did on her eye. So I'm going to put those caps back on tightly, and I'm going to move those markers way out of my way. But we are going to continue using light sand as well as the pink. So take a look here at what's going on with the shadows on the mannequin. And you want to do the same thing here. So we're going to get her arm wet completely with light sand. And then we're going to come in and do a little shadowing on the outside of her arm, as well as this little inside edge. And then a little divot or something here at the bend in her elbow. We have to get all the way down to her hand. So basically, from where her swimsuit strap is to the top of the swimsuit, we have to get all the way down here to her hand. But what I'll do is I'll color some sections, move down, and then I'll come back and I'll get some of my shadows, and then I'll continue my first wash down, come back, get a few shadows, and then finish my wash here, get some shadows, let that dry a little bit, and then I'll get a few shadows on the hand. So watch me first, and then you can do this after. Again, so here's the arm. I've turned the paper over, so I'm going to follow this mannequin right here. So we want to get one continuous wash of light sand, and I want to hit a little bit of pink as if though she got a little bit of sun on her shoulders and her arm and hand. So as I turn the corner, I want to come up here, get some pink on her shoulders, on her collarbone. And I'm going to start to do my first layer of shadowing here above her bust and on this side of her swimsuit strap while it's still wet. Now I need to continue the arm here without getting a brush stroke. And I almost waited too long. It started to dry a little faster than I thought. As I come down to her hand, I want to come in here, get the inside arm, outside edge of her shoulder. I'll get a third layer now on her bust, side of her swimsuit, the strap, her shoulders. Now I need to come all the way down here and finish getting her hand while it's still wet at her wrist. So this is the first layer to get the complete hand. Now I'll come back and get shadows. So this is under her armpit, the inside edge of her arm. There's a shadow from her body, the outside edge of her arm. So this is second layers. A little divot here for her bend in her elbow. And then for a third layer, so you can't really see what's going on. It's so bright up in here. But basically, I'm just giving a little more shadow here where her bust is, collarbone, shoulders, down on her arm, armpit. And then I want to throw just a little bit of sunburn right here on the top of her arm, which I forgot to do while it was still wet on the first layer. A little bit of pink on her hand, just to give it some color, something different than light sand only. Now at this stage, I want to come down into her hand and really emphasize some dark shadows to separate out the fingers and underneath her armpit. So I'll go ahead and let this dry and I'll come back and get that. Now while your arm is drying, let's come over here and let's get the other arm. Now this one, since the spotlight is hitting this whole front edge of her shoulder and the front arm of this front edge of this arm, we're only going to have a shadow on the underside. So there's only a shadow here on the underside of her arm. And then of course I'll throw a little more pink in here on her shoulder, down along her chest somewhere, and then on the edges of her arms. Even though we've already done one arm together, I want you to go ahead and watch me again one more time, and then you can come back and do this again with me at actual speed. So the first thing I want to do here is just get a nice, smooth, even base layer, and I'm also making sure not to draw beyond the edges. Now, while her shoulders and chest area are still wet, I want to get some pink in here so it'll blend in nicely, but the pink won't be too dominating. And then I want to come back and I'll just touch a few little shadows while it's still wet with my base layer. And then I want to continue drawing the rest of her arm before it starts to dry. Also, I intentionally stopped right above the armpit, so then once I picked up from where I left off, if there was a brush stroke here in the armpit area, it would be okay because I'm going to shade that some more later as well. Now I'm getting all the way down into her hand and her fingertips, being really careful to use the tip of my marker and get only right along each finger. I've also taken the time to make sure that I'm not coloring her thumbnail. Now I can come back up to that armpit area while it's still wet, and I want to throw in a little bit of pink on the tops of her arms. This is anywhere where you think she might be getting sunburn. And then we'll come back and we're going to start to emphasize all of her underarm area, which is shadowed from her body, and it's hiding from the spotlight. And then a little bit of color to mix in with that pink. And then while her chest area is still semi-wet, I want to come up there and touch it one more time so I don't get any brush strokes or hard edges. And also I can come down in here and start to darken some areas on her hand. And I think that's good enough. If you want, go ahead and rewind now and do it again with me at actual speed. Now let's take a look at her from the front. Now at this point in time, my girl has been drying, so basically she's almost completely dry. And you'll notice as they dry, they start to lose a little bit of their color, so it's not quite as saturated as you thought it would be for the first time. Something I want to do is I want to come back in here and just see, are there any kind of a hard shadow that I want to emphasize? So remember we did the sphere after things had dried, and you can come in and you can do a hard shadow, but it's going to leave an edge on there. Well, you can use that to your advantage. So if you want to get underneath her eyebrow, a little bit of an edge on her nose. If you want to do any kind of an edge underneath her chin, down onto the neck. And then any kind of emphasis on the little divot in her throat or her collarbones, as well as I like to emphasize the armpit area a little more, inside edges of her arms. But be careful, because once you lay this down, there's no going back. So start off with a small area and only move deeper into the arm or into her neck or on her face, only if you have to. So while I come in to do these final crisp shadows, what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and fold this in half so I can have these girls side by side as I'm going in and doing any last details for the shadows. Also, while I'm coming in and getting my last minute shadows, I can go ahead and touch her eyes one more time with some of this color. Now, so far I like everything about what I've done on my girl, so I'm going to go ahead and keep moving forward with this drawing. The next thing I want to do is I want to come in here and get her hair. Now, if you recall, the girl that we were referencing for her hair that we used to develop our swimsuit model, we were worried mostly just about drawing in the big chunks in the direction that her hair was flowing. When you come in and start to color her hair, we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to worry about hitting the main chunks. We're not worried about all the fine little hairs until the very end. Now, if you'll notice on her hair, there's kind of these areas where there's these highlights. So these are the shiny parts of her hair reflecting light back towards the camera. If we were to take mocha brown and just come in and start putting dark blobs of mocha brown, you kind of don't have a chance to go back and get these lighter spots. But there is a trick to getting these while you're putting in the mocha. So I want you to try a little experiment with me right here off to the side. So take out your clear blender as well as your mocha. And what we're going to do is we're going to use just the tip here of the clear blender. And I want you to do a few just little squiggles. I just did that from the front. Sorry, so of course we need to do this on the back. So just below that, I'm going to do the same thing again. So I'm doing a few squiggles with my clear blender, and then immediately I'm going over the top of these with my mocha. And you can see those clear blender through with the mocha on top. So let's come back here and look at that from the front, and you can really see it here on the front. Now this is definitely a nice way where we could come in and leave some highlight areas. But you'll notice even though her hair is curly or wavy, it's not going to be these thick, wide curls the whole way. This is going to look very amateurish. If you look in here, you'll see there's some swipes of this reflection traveling back and down a little bit, and then nothing. There's a dark area, a little bit of reflections out here, here, dark area, a little bit of reflection back in here. So don't use this technique and think you're going to draw every single curl using your clear blender. Now for me, as I come over to the back side and I'm going to get ready to start coloring in her hair, I've printed the photo of her hair flipped. So this would be what it looks like here from the back side version. This is what it looks like from the front. So just keep that in mind as you're doing hair, that whatever you're doing here on the back, it's going to be the opposite of what you want from the front. Okay, so starting with your clear blender and your craft brown, let's go ahead and take these caps off and get ready to start coloring together. If you're a total beginner and you're doing hair for the first time, be sure to just watch me all the way through, and then you can come back to this part and do it again with me at the same time. Now what I'm doing here is I'm adding some clear blender, but only where there's highlights. And then I'll come back and I'll lay down my craft brown as a complete wash right over the top of the blender. And you can see where those highlight areas are showing through. So while I'm laying down some layers of highlights with the clear blender, I'm looking at the photo and I want to make sure I'm duplicating pretty much the same thing. And then as I come in and I start to lay down my washes of the craft brown, I'm following the direction of her hair, and I'm doing this in segments, the same as what I've broken her hair up into these different segments. Also, when we're doing hair, you kind of want to break the rule a little bit using your marker and intentionally getting a few brush strokes, and all the while making sure that your brush strokes are following in the direction that the hair is flowing. So while it's still wet now, I can start to come in and start to emphasize some under layers. Without getting too many harsh brush strokes. While I'm doing all these secondary layers, I'm also looking back at the photo, trying to hit the same dark spots that I'm seeing from the actual photo. And then while this side is drying, I'll go ahead and work on the other side. Now keep watching me as I basically repeat what I've done from the other side. But again, I want you to be able to go back and follow along with this at actual speed. So what I'm doing right now is I laid down some of the clear on all the different highlights, and now I'm going to come in and I'm going to wash with the craft brown. Again, working with only segments that are flowing with how the hair is flowing. Sometimes you'll see that I will go down along her cheekbone and her neck with the marker, but then immediately I want to come back out into the hair and continue getting those hair brush strokes going away from her neck. Now I can switch back to this side and continue to get some hair strands. Being careful not to draw on her neck or ears. Again, your eye should always be going back to the photo and you're trying to duplicate what you see in real life. And then I'll switch back to this side now, coming in for more second and third layers. Now that you can see the sequence of events, how I'm going through and getting these different layers and brush strokes, if you want to go back to the beginning and do this with me, you can do that now, or watch just a little bit further and I'll do a couple last details. So go ahead and try yours now up to this point. Now this is what we were tracking on from the back view. So as I turn her over, and we'll get the other photo reference from the front, you can see here the different layers of the marker going down wet on wet and then wet on semi-dry. And then also the areas where I put in some of the clear blender, and that made it so the mocha wouldn't stain very well. So another thing to remember, when you're using a really dark staining marker, it will start to want to bleed into the other parts of your drawing. So just make sure that as you're coloring, you're staying just like one pencil width away from the borders so it has room to bleed in. If there are any areas, like for instance her ears or something where the hair bled into it, don't worry, because later on when we come in we use our ink to redraw the ears and neck and everything. You'll be able to separate the two layers out and you'll be able to see where everything belongs. Now that we like her face and her hair, let's go ahead and come down and we'll get her legs. So now looking here at the back side of the paper, if we look at our the mannequin, you can see that we're going to do a wash for her leg, and then it's mostly shadowing here on the outside edge, and we want to show a little emphasis down here in the kneecap area. So let's do this, the support leg first. Before I come into to color this leg, I just want to make the front of her swimsuit a little more narrow and make this leg just a little bit wider coming into here. Alright, so I want to have my pink as well as my light sand ready to go. Now when we're coloring this, you need to start at the top and then work your way all the way down to that strap on her shoe. And it's tempting to want to come in here sideways and go like this and back, but by the time you come down here and get the next section, you're going to have a brush stroke where those two layers overlap. So you have to start here and work your way down the leg. What I'm going to do is, just in case I get a brush stroke, as long as I am doing a slight curve, it'll look like the curve of her legs. So I'll be going like that the whole way. The downside is you might have something like this all along the outside edges of her leg. So what I'll do is I'll lightly frame her leg out, and then I can come in and get in between that and move as we go and just never stop. And then we'll hit some highlights with pink as well. So what we'll do is I'm going to go through here at actual speed so you can get a sense of how I'm coloring this, the pace that I'm moving at, and the way that I'm going to frame it out, as well as coloring at an angle. And then you can always come back to this and do it again with me at actual speed. Now after I frame out my edges a little bit, you'll see I'm doing my brush strokes the same roundness as her leg. And then I want to come in and I want to quickly hit it with some pink while this is still wet. And then I'm going to continue with that same brush stroke. So I'll frame out one side, get the brush stroke following the cylinder of her leg, and I'll bring this all the way down into her kneecap area. Once I get down to her kneecap, I know I can kind of stop right here, throw some pink in there. And if I end up picking up a brush stroke below this, it's okay because I'm going to darken in this kneecap later, the same as we were doing on the armpits. Also, you'll notice I'm still following the cylinder shape of her leg, just in case I accidentally get a brush stroke as I'm moving down. Then as it gets more narrow down here, then I can move and start to do some sideways brush strokes. Now quickly, while it's still wet, I want to start doing the shadows matching from my mannequin. So since I did the full leg all the way down to the ankle, as I come back up here now for this brush stroke, it's already starting to dry quite a bit, and I'm getting a little bit of a hard edge, but that's okay. What I'll do is I'll come back up here and I'll just get it a little more wet and see if it'll kind of bleed out into the leg a little bit more. And down here at the kneecap, we will want to emphasize just a little bit that there's a bone going inside of there. So having that kneecap underneath. And then whatever your shadow is doing here, we're going to stop at the strap on her leg. But we can continue now with getting the rest of her foot below this foot strap from her shoe. And I'll just put a little bit of pink here on top of her foot. And I want to continue. So this calf from the leg muscle coming down to the ankle, I want to continue showing that same shadow on this side of the strap from her shoe. And right now it's still semi-wet. If I wanted to emphasize her hip one more time, or a little bit of shadow from the edge of her swimsuit. And then of course I want to emphasize this kneecap a little more. And now I can come down to show the ankle, a shadow from the strap from her shoe, and the top of her foot going into the shoe. So go ahead and do the support leg now, and we'll need to let it dry completely before we come back and we do the walking foot behind here. While we're waiting for this leg to dry, let's go ahead and come up here and we'll get the pink strap from her swimsuit. Now, when I take a close look at this from the front, I'm going to come in and I'm going to color the strap. And I can see a few little corners where I didn't quite get the flesh tone to come all the way up and touch right up to here and in here. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll touch those spots right now and let them dry completely before I come in and I color this pink, because I don't want those areas to bleed into each other. Now that I've let that dry, I can go ahead and come in and get my first layer of pink on the straps. And while it was semi-wet, I went back and I just hit it one more time to get a nice rich stain of pink color. Here's what it looks like from the front. Go ahead, do yours now. Now we'll come in here and let's get the other leg. Basically, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do a wash, and while I'm doing a wash, I'll hit some shadows underneath her swimsuit, and this is a shadow on the inside of her leg, and it's going to separate the back leg from the front leg. Now this walking foot, it's a 3/4 view, so you can see the foot going behind, but our foot is basically right in this area right here. And I want to emphasize again the kneecap area, and then I'll throw a little bit of pink here on the outside edges of her thigh and her calf, as if though it got a little bit of sun on it. Now I'm going to start coloring this second leg here at actual speed. If you want to follow along with me right now, you can, or watch it all the way through and then come back to this. Again, you'll notice that I will slightly frame out the leg, and then I'll start doing my brush strokes going across the leg. And I'm following the same cylinder shape. In case some of these brush strokes show through as it dries, it'll still look like her leg is round. Now what I want to do is I want to throw some pink on her leg, which is out into the spotlight area, while it's still wet, and that way the pink will bleed and blend nicely into the leg. And then I'll go ahead and I'll start my first layer of shadows. And then I quickly need to go back to where the ink is already wet and continue moving down so I do not get any brush strokes from it drying. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and come down into the calf area, and then I'll quickly jump back up and throw some pink onto her kneecaps. Then I quickly need to get back down to where I left off so I don't get a brush stroke, and I can go all the way down to the ankle, and now I have a nice stopping point. And then I can come back while it's still semi-wet and get some of these second layers. I'm working now into the shadows for her knees, the inside of her leg, and then of course all the way down on the walking foot. Now I want to give her leg a little bit of time to dry. So I'm going to come down in here and get her foot, and I'll throw some pink on there while it's still wet. And then the leg above it as it's drying. Now when I come back into it, I can start emphasizing those shadows with the slightly harder edge. So now we can come back up into the thigh and start to darken in that inside edge. And the shadows that I'm doing now, I'm only staying on the shadow side as I'm stacking these layers together. So now I've colored in the walking leg. I've gone in and I've hit some pink on some edges, as well as doing some shadowing while it's wet. Now what I want is I want it to get semi-dry, even a little bit beyond semi-dry, so I can really get some harder cast shadows for the knee and the outside edge of her leg. And I want to really separate these two legs by having the walking leg be darker behind this front support leg. Now that it's dry just a little bit, I'm going to come in here and just get my hard edge shadows. And pretty much the lower leg from the kneecap down, I'm just making the whole thing dark, so it really feels like it's going back into space. And I'm going to also let this dry one more time, and I'm going to come in and hit this for a 4th time from the kneecap down. Now that this leg here has been drying, it's pretty much dry, maybe just barely a little bit wet. I'm going to get my fourth stack of shadow here below the kneecap. And I'm especially doing this because it's the walking foot and this is going back into space. Normally I wouldn't emphasize the shadows so much. Over on this knee, while it's now bone dry, I might even just hit this one more time to show that kneecap without getting too crazy. The straps on her shoes would ever so slightly throw a cast shadow here onto her foot. Now that it's bone dry, I'll come in here and I'll get a cast shadow. So this is below the strap from her shoe. And just to show her foot is going into her shoe, I'll come down here also while it's bone dry. And I'm just emphasizing her foot is there going inside that shoe. And this foot here has had a chance to dry as well, so I'll come in, I'll get it dark going into the shoe. It's dark behind this leg and a little bit of a cast shadow coming from the strap of the shoe. So let's take a look at now from the front. So here we have our light direction. We've got all of our shadows here on this side of the body. And then the walking foot is behind this leg and going back into space. So it's really dark. We did our fourth stack of layers inside of there. Also, I went in and I darkened the fingers behind her hand. And now that they're bone dry, I might even go in for a fourth time darkening in those fingers. And then up here in her face, so now everything is totally bone dry. If I want to come in with my mocha marker and just do a few more directions of her hair or layering or curls. And then also if I want to come in with some light sand and just get a little bit of a cast shadow from her hair here on her face, and then maybe emphasize her jawbone on her neck just one last time. So here I'll do a little bit of some shadows coming from her hair right here on her face. And again, this is totally bone dry and I'm staying with the light sand. And it's going to give me a harsh brush stroke, but that's what I want for this cast shadow. Also the inside of the part of her hair, I'll go ahead and get that one more time. And then down here at her neck and jawline. Just emphasizing the shadow from her jaw. That little divot in her throat. And then I can switch to mocha. And I'll refer back to my photo here, looking at it from the backside, and just get a few more kind of groups of dark colors inside of her hair. Now for me, being able to draw hair really well is the one thing that I've worked on the least amount. But I always know that if I refer back to a photo, I can pretty much get it pretty good. For some people who are super good at drawing hair, I've noticed that it really makes your drawings look very professional, and it even emphasizes your designs as well. And when I take a look at this from the front, I feel like I can hit her eyes one last time with this frost blue. This is a very, very light blue, so it's taking me a couple layers to kind of get some stain down onto there. Plus we put the flesh tone also right over the tops of the eyes. I think that's good enough. Now the rest of this we're going to get when we come back in with color pencils as well as some ink. At this stage we're ready to go ahead and start getting our base layer for our pink swimsuit, as well as starting to put in cast shadows while it's still wet, and then we'll come and emphasize some areas when it's bone dry, and then later on we'll get her shoes to match. Now if you take a look at the photo of the model that we have here, the light source is coming from this side, so it's lit up on her hips here, but it's darker on the outside edges of her legs here and here. And the reason I have it flipped like this is so when we turn our page over to look at our mannequin, our model, as well as referring back to the swimsuit, you can see here that the light source is going in the same direction for all three of them. So again, what we want to do is we want to color this solid pink while it's still wet. We're going to come in and we're going to start getting our cast shadows. So you can see we're going to show a little bit of her bust right here. You can see the same thing going on there. And then down along the side of her body and a little bit of her rib cage. Also on my model, I put a very light belly button under there just so you can see an ever slight shadow, and we need to get that right away because we don't want any kind of a sharp line or edge or brush stroke. And then we'll come in, we'll get the bottom of her swimsuit and emphasize a little bit of the shadows coming up here into her hip bone area. Again, if you're coloring a swimsuit for the very first time, I highly recommend to just go ahead and watch me all the way through, and then you can come back to this point and do it again with me at actual speed. Now the most important thing is I want to get a base layer down with the least amount of brush strokes. So I'm trying to just keep this wet as I move down. And I'm following her torso, and then as I get out to the sides, I use the tip of my pen to follow right along the edge. So here I rotate my paper so I can keep using the tip of my pen along with my right hand because I have more control. And I want to make sure that I'm always touching where I left off. So anywhere where the ink is already wet, I want to continue from using that. Now here's where I'm going to come in and emphasize her belly button just a little bit while it's still wet. And then as that dries, it will not have a harsh brush stroke. And now I can come up to the bust area where they have the elastic along the top and the gathers down in between the bust area. And I can start to throw all these shadows in here while her swimsuit is still pretty wet. Then I can emphasize a little bit of the shaping of her stomach, just a little more of a hit at the belly button. And then I'll come down in towards the bottom of the swimsuit to get where this is curving away from the spotlight and down in between her leg. And then one quick little hit here where her hip bone and her hip are coming together. So here I've done my first wash plus my shadows while it's still super wet. I want it to get just semi-dry. And I'll come in here and I'll start to emphasize my shadowing for anything that's a little more distinct. Also, I'm avoiding the binding down here because I want it to look lighter than the main body of the fabric. And I'm showing a little bit of the binding up in here as well, the elastic hidden underneath. So at this stage, I'm going to come in for my third layer while it's almost dry. And now I can see that my swimsuit here is going to be darker than the straps. So I'll go ahead and hit my straps with a second layer. And I want to emphasize it being dark, going behind her neck and coming down onto the body where it's hitting the light. And then it'll be dark where it's going underneath the swimsuit. So I'm just emphasizing behind her neck, where it goes under her swimsuit, and a little bit of the cast shadow side of that strap. So go ahead and get your swimsuit with the first, second layers wet, and then a third layer of semi-dry. And then let's let it dry completely, and we'll come in, we'll get just a few cast shadows that should be nice and crisp and dark. So now taking a look at this from the front, we're letting it dry before we come in and hit some darker shadows. The last thing we can do is we can come in here and color her shoes. Now obviously we want to have pink shoes to match the pink swimsuit, but if they happen to be the exact same pink, it looks kind of silly. It almost starts to look costume-ish. Also, you know, whenever you're trying to match shoes to a garment, you never quite find the exact same color in the shoe. So what we're going to do is similar to what we were doing over here. So far the swimsuit is going to be these shades of pink, and her skin tone is going to be these shades of the light sand. And remember here where we were mixing pink and light sands together, and they perfectly match all around, so this whole thing could be a collection of clothing to match her. That's what we're going to do with her shoes. So what I want to do is I want to lay down some pink for her shoes, similar to her swimsuit, and then while it's wet, I'm going to put some light sand on top. And then I'll let it get totally dry, and I'll put pink back on top of that, and it'll be 2 layers of pink with light sand in between. And that way the shoes will match back to the swimsuit, but not the exact same color. And take out your pink as well as your light sand markers. And watch what I do here. I'm going to color it pink with a base layer immediately with the light sand, so it's not a totally pure pink. And then we'll come back and start getting our pink shadows while it's wet, let it semi-dry, and some more pink shadows. So follow along with me. I'm going to basically lay down some pink and then immediately hit it with the light sand. And then I'll move on to another section and do the same thing. At this point, I'm not worried about shadows or anything. I just want a nice, even color blend, and I want the 2 colors to mix together without any brush strokes. So I've done my first wash of pink mixing with the light sand. Now for the rest of this, I'm going to just use pink for layering in my shadows. And I'm going to start back where I left off because this is the driest part. So I'm getting my shadows in pink while it's still semi-wet. Always referring to the cast shadow side of the body. The light source is coming from here. And now I want it to dry completely, and then I'll come in and I'll hit it with some nice crisp hard shadows. Now for me, what I want to do is up here on her walking hand with the diamond thumb, I'm showing the thumbnail. And I want to do the same thing. I'm going to layer some pink first, some flesh tones second, to give her just kind of a light tone on tone nail polish that matches back to her swimsuit. So again, I'm just going to hit her fingernail with pink base, so that's going through to the front of the paper. And then my light sand, just to tone that pink down a little bit, just to take that hard pink edge off. And now I've let the shoes dry a little bit. They're still slightly wet, but they're definitely more on the dry side. So I'm going to just emphasize the cast shadows one last time. So I'm basically stacking now for third and fourth time. I'm also putting a little divot here where her big toe is kind of poking the shoe. So go ahead and do your shoes now. Now while her shoes are finishing drying, let's go ahead and take a look at this from the front. And I'll zoom in and we'll just go down piece by piece all the way through to her feet. So we've colored in her face using the light sand as well as the pink, and then going back and hitting everything with secondary shadows while it was still wet and while it was semi-dry. We also put a little bit of the flesh tone here in the part of her hair, and then we came down and we got her neck, shoulders, arms, all the way down to her hands. And all the while we were leaving these pink straps nice and clean and pure white, so the pink color will really show through. Then we went back and we emphasized some highlights in her hair by using a combination of the craft brown as well as the blender marker. And then I put a few little dots of blue on her eyes. I did it when it was semi-wet, and then 2 more times while it was bone dry. So when we were doing her arms, we had little bits of pink just to show some sun hitting her shoulders, the tops of her arms, the tops of her hands. And then we went in, we colored her pink swimsuit. We did 1 complete wash all the way. Then we did some shadowing while it was still wet. And then we came back when it was semi-dry and got a few more crisp shadows. I still want to go in here one more time, maybe with it wet. It seems like we did. We went in a 3rd time when it was dry. But I just want to crispen up just a couple more like little wrinkles and shadows under her bust. Just a little bit more. Then the legs, we've already finished the legs. We have some pink on the light side. We have stacks of shadows here on the shadow side. We emphasize the knees. The walking leg back here, this is going in a 4th time to get this level of darkness. And then we came in and we made her shoes pink to match her swimsuit, but we did a combination of pink and flesh tone, so they're not a totally perfect match back to the swimsuit. And then we did the same thing here for her thumbnail polish. I think what I'll do is, while this is bone dry, I'm going to just get a couple more cast shadows here on the swimsuit, and then we're done with the coloring. And I think that's good enough for now. Also, if you remember, I put a little dash here where her belly button goes. Now that I'm finished coloring and shading, I want to go ahead and just get rid of that so it does not look like her swimsuit is see-through and you can see her belly button. And again, that's pencil here on the front side. Now that you've completed coloring your girl with all the markers, go ahead and scan this and turn this in as part of completing this section in the video series for doing the flesh tone, swimsuit, and hair.